Hello, this is TJR, and welcome to Album of the Week. If this is your first time, welcome. This is the weekly show where I recommend a new release album, provided, of course, there is a new release album for the week that I can recommend. Last week's Album of the Week was World on the Ground by Sarah Jaros. This week's Album of the Week is Pick Me Up Off the Floor by Norah Jones. Now, before we get started, if you like what I'm doing, be sure to click like, click subscribe, and smash the bell notification icon so you can know when I release new videos. Okay, let's get to it. Norah Jones's last official studio album, Daybreak, was one of my favorites of 2016. She was lauded by critics for returning to her piano-driven, jazz-inspired roots, which indeed she had. But with Daybreak, she wasn't just content to bring us back to the same familiar musical territory. Instead, she took her musical beginnings and moved them into a previously unheard, progressive musical complexity that challenged perceptions of what to expect from her as an artist in the future. Daybreak impressed me as a musician without feeling like it was one of those albums that would probably only be appreciated by musicians. But one problem with being very impressed by an artist's current release is that it can prejudice you when you hear the next one, and I am no exception to that failing. Of course, doing this is completely wrong-headed on my part, but tell that to my subconscious that enjoyed Daybreak so much that it wants a part 2 versus a potentially completely different musical experience. And perhaps Norah Jones might have sensed that a lot of her audience might feel the same way also. So instead of releasing another studio album, she instead released 7 internet singles over the course of a year, and then compiled it into one single release entitled Begin Again, a too big to be called an EP and not quite big enough to be called an album release that holds up remarkably well as a single listen, even though all the songs were written with different collaborators and with no consideration for any kind of thematic album unity. Personally, I loved Begin Again and found it to be her most Beatle-like release, in that each song was a different flavor, something that the Beatles were well known for during their later period. So this brings me now to Pick Me Up Off the Floor, and what I will refer to as the actual studio album follow-up to Daybreak. And while I still went into Pick Me Up Off the Floor with some residual prejudice left by Daybreak, I have to say that this album is not so much a sequel as it is a gradual next step progression. Pick Me Up Off the Floor is big on musicality, musicianship, and musical arrangements, proving Jones is not only a great songwriter and musician, but also a great producer, taking the renewed jazz elements of Daybreak and finding unique and challenging ways to combine her pop and Americana roots as well. Pick Me Up Off the Floor musically challenges both the artist and the audience to redefine what they expect of her, and wisely keeps the lyrics fairly minimalist, as the lyrical themes provide an anchor for the sometimes experimental way that Norah Jones combines both jazz, pop, and Americana. There are a few exceptions where the album does sometimes sail into comfortable waters. To Love, a gospel-driven ballad, is a good example, but for the majority of the album, she is taking musical chances, pushing herself and her influences into unexpected places. And for this reason, it's also not as easy to digest as Daybreak. It took several listens for it to all coalesce for me, but it's been worth the effort, as I now feel that the album succeeds Daybreak. The only thing that mystifies me about the album is its opening track, entitled How I Weep. It is so unlike anything I have heard her do that it caught me off guard and took me a few listens to understand it. It's also, from a musical standpoint, thematically very different from the rest of the album. Perhaps I am being unoriginal in my thinking, but with few exceptions, I think that your opening track should definitely represent what will be the dominant musical feel of your album, and How I Weep doesn't do this. I'm not saying it's a bad track, but it does completely misrepresent most of what I have described in this review. By way of comparison, the dark, rugged electric blues jazz of track 2, entitled Flame Twin, is much better suited to the task of inviting you into this album and what to expect for the rest of its running time.
You can't be found, my twin in flames, lift me from the ground.
The standard edition of this album ends at track 11, entitled Heaven Above, but it should have ended with the first of 2 bonus tracks available in the Target edition, available here in the US, entitled Street Stranger, which, like the aforementioned How I Weep, does step away from most of the musical conventions featured on this album, but it does so in a very big and grandiose way. I describe this song as a epic classic rock album closer. It is 4 minutes and 43 seconds, but could have easily expanded out to 6 minutes or more without losing any steam.
Like strangers on the street.
Another great highlight is the track entitled Hurts to Be Alone. Just the interplay between the piano, drums, and bass on this track is worth the price of admission.
Take from me what you can hold. The things I need already sold. I try.
But Norah's vocal melody takes it to another level. I am, once again, continually impressed with just how far she has come as a songwriter and arranger. And it's tracks like this that make me regret that I didn't pick this one up on vinyl. I also want to give a shout out to the track entitled Heartbroken Day After. If you've ever wondered what old school country music might sound like if it cross-pollinated with experimental jazz, look no further. Heartbroken Day After combines the songwriting styles of Hank Williams and adds a progressive jazz element into the mix, if you can imagine that.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. At least that's what I tell myself anyway.
Pick Me Up Off the Floor challenges the listener. It's not afraid to be artsy, but aside from the album's opening track, it never feels like it's trying to be artsy. It's just an artist trying to be the best she can be, and not content to just repeat past successes. So have you heard this album yet? Do you plan on listening to it? And has this review influenced you to check it out? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. And what new release from this week should I talk about next week? Everybody take care. I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.